Go ahead and start. Thank you all so much for joining today's webinar, How Teachers and Parents Can Support Sex Education in Today's Classrooms. It's really awesome to see so many new friends, old friends here, and we're really excited to get into it. I'm going to start by introducing myself and my organization, and then I'll go into brief bios for each of our amazing panelists, who I would also love to thank for coming today and supporting this effort. So my name is Tara Jones. I am the founder and executive director of a small grassroots nonprofit called the Youth Sexpert Program. Our mission is that each fall we provide a semester's worth of comprehensive sex ed, as well as communications training through digital programming. The goal there being to encourage the next generation of sexual health advocates with, the vital knowledge that they need and the vital, information that can help them share with their peers. Since we know that young folks may not always feel comfortable talking to the adults in their lives about these conversations. And if they are talking to one another, we need these conversations to be informed. And so that's our work. A lot of why we are so passionate about also hosting parent education events such as this is because we really want our program to be more approachable for parents. And we really encourage parents of youth who are in our program to continue these conversations at home. So that's a lot of what today's goal is. And I'm going to go ahead and briefly introduce each of our panelists. And you'll also get a chance to hear a little bit more about the work that they do from their own mouths. So first of all, Alison Macklin holds a master's in social work and is the policy and advocacy director at SEICUS, Sex Ed for Social Change. She provides guidance to communities looking to advance sex education and is a national leader in the comprehensive sex ed field for over 20 years. In 2019, she helped author and pass Colorado's Youth Wellness Act, ensuring that young people in the state are able to access inclusive, comprehensive sex education. Alison is the author of the internationally published book, Making Sense of It, A Guide to Sex for Teens and Their Parents Too, a skilled sex education trainer, and she's also an adjunct professor at the University of Denver Graduate School of Social Work. We're going to move on to Isy Abraham-Raveson, who uses they, she pronouns. They are a sexuality educator and former preschool teacher based in Philadelphia. They have a master's in social work in sexuality education from Widener and a bachelor's degree in gender and sexuality studies from Williams College. Isy co-founded the organization Yes, which provides anti-oppressive, consent-based, pleasure-focused sex ed to people of all ages, including children, teachers, parents, and healthcare providers. Mariah, who uses she, her pronouns, is a Latin sex educator and digital learning designer who is committed to inclusive, shame-free, and culturally responsive sex education. She created sex ed files to answer anonymous questions and make complex topics accessible through social media. Informed by her lived experience and guided by QT BIPOC wisdom, Mariah's work centers justice, joy, and the belief that everyone deserves access to sexual health knowledge. And finally, Vanessa Bennett is a USA Today bestselling author and podcaster who helps adults raise teens and tweens with joy. She is a co-author of the bestselling book, This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained, and co-host of the This Is So Awkward podcast. She's also president of content at Less Awkward. She's a frequent contributor to Scary Mommy, a founder of Dynamo Girls, which is a company focused on building kids' self-esteem through sports and puberty education. Vanessa is a graduate of Wellesley College, but perhaps her most important schooling comes from raising her own 4 children, ages 14 to 22. So thank you again for all the panelists who are joining us today. I'm really excited to get into a lot of these questions. We're gonna go ahead and start off first with Alison. And for each of the questions, if you all wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more in your own words about how your work directly serves youth, teachers and or parents directly, that would be awesome. So my question for Alison is, what laws should teachers be aware of when making attempts to bring a sex-positive attitude into their classroom?
Great. Thanks so much, Tara. And it's so nice to be here with all of you. First, just a little bit about SEICUS. SEICUS, Sex Ed for Social Change. We've been around for 60 years. It was our 60th birthday just last year. So I guess we're going on 61. But we work to advance sex education in the communities where young people are. That is at the federal level. We have a federal piece of legislation called the Real Education and Access for Healthy Youth Act, which was just introduced in May of this, just last month. That is a federal piece of legislation that would mandate that everyone, wherever, regardless of where they live, gets comprehensive sex education as well as service provision so that they can access reproductive health care. But we also do this at the state level. SEICUS actually, works with different state legislators. We work with various school districts and work to advance sex education policy so that teachers and parents and students have access to what they need in the communities where they live. So very happy to be here with you all. I think the biggest thing when we think about inclusivity is we really want to ensure that young people are feeling safe, whoever they are, however they're showing up in the classroom, that they are able to affirm who they are and able to feel safe and ask questions about who they are without shame and without stigma, that that their lived experiences are honored. And I think that is a first, the framework with which we need to look through. So comprehensive sex education takes that framework and works to ensure that young people are included and that different perspectives are brought into the fray, and that everybody is allowed to learn about different aspects of sexuality without judgment. Um, where this gets tricky, though, is that when we look at education law across the country, it's all local control. And so what that means is that while there's some federal policies around education broadly speaking, so a great example is the Civil Rights Act, for example, which desegregated classrooms. But we know that in practicality, that still was a big hurdle. And even today, that there are reports of segregation happening in our public school systems. So while the federal government can come up with some of these broad guidances, it's then up to the local control schools and the states, and then even within that, the district, and even with that, the actual school, of how these laws are enacted and made real for the experiencer. Um, and it's not a surprise that in the United States, this is a huge patchwork. So if you grow up in California, versus growing up in Illinois versus growing up in Texas, everybody's sex education, depending on your zip code, looks a little different. Even within the state of California, you might find that your sex education looks a little different from one city to the next city, from district to district, from school to school. So that's a really important thing to remember. And that's why it's so important to recognize that this is a really local issue, and that parents and young people need to be aware of what the laws are in their communities. So recognizing that there's no federal law yet, we're working on it, that what is the state law? And then within the state law, there's all sorts of different caveats. So, we have, first of all, whether or not sex education is even required. So some states have sex education as a requirement, like Colorado, like California, and Oregon, or whether or not, like Texas, there's no requirement. What kind of curriculum is being taught? Is it abstinence only until marriage? Is it what we call abstinence plus? Is it truly comprehensive sex education? An abstinence only until marriage type of program sets the standard that everybody should be in a married heterosexual type of relationship. Abstinence plus is a little bit better at saying abstinence is best, but also here's some other methods that you could use to prevent a pregnancy or STIs, often still very framed in a heterosexual oriented framework. And then there's comprehensive sex education, which is all of those things and so much more, going into some of the softer skills of relationship building and consent and menstrual education and so much more, because sexuality is such a deep and intersectional issue. So it's really important for teachers to know what's the law in their state. And then even further, if we have it versus abstinence versus contraception, is it required to be medically accurate? Is it inclusive of LGBTQ plus content? There are some states that have passed laws that have said you cannot talk about different same-sex relationships, or you cannot talk about families even that are not ascribing to a certain heteronormative configuration. Whether or not parents and guardians have the ability to opt their child out, or if they have to actually physically opt them into this education. This is the only form of education where we're doing this on this like one-off basis and trying to figure out, is it okay for your young person to be a part of it? Otherwise, when I register my kids for school, I sign them up, right? And I'm like, okay, you're in it for the year. So those are huge things to consider. And while there is not a ton of accountability, so there aren't police showing up at schools around like, are you teaching this, that, or the other thing? To know that there are bad actors who, and so by not following the rules, teachers and the schools can actually be held accountable. So I think that that's really important to know. Um, but so say you've looked at your state, you're like, yeah, I think I'm good here. I think I understand my lane. Then you have to do even a deeper dive. So looking into district policies. So there's a lot of districts who have taken state policies and made them even better. And said, we're going to, make sure that our classrooms are safe from discrimination and that we're going to be inclusive and affirming of individuals. Um, which is beautiful, especially even in places where the state law is not so great, districts that have gone above and beyond to make sure that teachers and administrators really have that policy support in their back pocket. And then there's some states that have restrictions on guest speakers who you could bring in, what organization they represent. Some districts have mandatory curriculum that you have to choose from. So it's really going to be, it's on the sex educator, unfortunately, to know this information. And so what we've done at SEICUS is we've really tried to break this down for folks in a little bit of an easier, more manageable way. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment. So what we've come up with are these state profiles and our report cards. So if you go to SEICUS.org, you can pull up our map and you can find out your state. So we're not at a point where we're able to give district level information because there are so many school districts out there, but you can see based on where you live. Oklahoma, you get an F. Texas, you're actually getting a C minus. And that's because we're taking into account all sorts of data points around from policies. So we're looking not only at the state laws, but we're also looking at school board, the State Board of Education standards for education, and taking into account additional pieces of information. So recently, some things that have been passed in legislation are mandatory menstrual education, for example, which is a beautiful addition to comprehensive sex education. So that's kind of bumped some states up a little bit in the grading system. Unfortunately, there's also some states that have switched from an opt-out to an opt-in, which kind of bumps them down in the grading system. So all of this is available on our website. It was just released yesterday. So these are our 2025 state report card grades. Oregon leading the pack, top of the list. Unfortunately, 25% of these states are getting an F. So, not surprising of where we are given the sociopolitical climate that we're currently living in. But I do encourage you to take a look at our website, and I'll drop it in the chat as well for you all for later. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was super informative. I especially loved the advice around looking beyond just what your state is doing and looking into what your actual district looks like. That's the advice that I am going to take personally. So that's awesome, and congratulations to SEICUS on that new launch. Um, so I'm going to move on to Izzy, who I know your organization does a lot of direct work with young people in school settings. And I was wondering if you have any advice for teachers and educators who are called upon to lead sex education workshops in their school, and how they might best be able to prepare for that responsibility.
Yes, thank you. Um, Hi everybody. As you already heard, I'm Izzy. Um, I think y'all already heard a lot about Yes, Your Empowered Sexuality. We're based in Philadelphia. If you're interested in learning more about Yes, our website is yourempoweredsexuality.org, or you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Yes to Consent. But we do a lot of different kinds of work with all the different age groups, all the different roles we all have in life. So if you want to know more about that, you can, yeah, thanks, Sarah. Um, yeah, I could talk about this question forever. I'm going to try to be concise. The first thing I'll say is that nobody should be assigned to teach sex ed who's not trained to teach sex ed. So if that's happening to you, I'm so sorry. That's not right. There's a lot of people who are, professionals and experts at teaching sex ed, and then they want someone who has no training and is totally overwhelmed to do it, and it doesn't make sense. So yeah, I have a friend who's a third grade teacher who was just told, you're teaching sex ed now. And we had a lot of talks about that. So first of all, if you're in that situation, I'm so sorry. Second of all, there are a ton of resources and ways to learn more and prepare yourself. So we can talk about some of those, but I also know that teachers don't have time for that, right? Because you're really overworked. And if you're being asked to teach sex ed and that's not your expertise, you're probably doing two jobs at the same time, and that is unfair. But there are a lot of free resources. I know in Philadelphia, we're using the 3Rs curriculum from Advocates for Youth. That's a free curriculum that has a lot of support and resources and is meant to be designed to be taught by someone who's never taught sex ed before. It has a script all written out. So there are things like that. There are lots of, trainings you can take. We at Yes have a training series on a lot of different specific aspects of sex ed, like how to answer questions that are hard, how to manage a classroom in an anti-oppressive way, how to talk about body liberation, how to talk about abortion and reproductive justice with young people. So there are things like that that you can do. But to go a little bit smaller, because as I said, I know you don't have time to take on a whole second job and get trained in a whole new role. The first thing that I'll say that I think is really important is don't be afraid to say, I don't know. You don't have to be an expert. It's not helpful to young people to pretend you're an expert when you're not. It's actually really helpful for them to see that adults also don't know all the answers. And it's helpful to talk to them about why. Sometimes I say to young people, I actually don't know the answer to this because I didn't have good sex ed, right? Like there's not a lot of good sex ed out there. A lot of adults might say really confidently that they know something about sex ed and be misinformed because this is actually not something that people talk about a lot, right? And that can open up a really good conversation about why these topics are so taboo, why it's hard to find good information, and then working together to find reliable sources, right? How do you assess what's a good source? And also, you know, it builds a lot of trust to take a student's question and say, I can't answer that for you right now, but I'm going to bring it back tomorrow. I think the first teacher who ever did that for me, it wasn't a sex ed class, but I just remember thinking like, oh, my teacher cares about my question. My teacher took this home and brought me more information. It kind of is unfortunately rare, and it demonstrates a lot of care for students. So it's okay not to know. It's okay to work together with students to find out. Um, Another thing I would say is it makes sense if it feels really uncomfortable to you to talk about sex ed topics with young people, especially people like my friend who's a third grade teacher who's doing this with really young kids. It can feel really fraught. It can feel really confusing about what's appropriate. So I think a lot of it too is like look through those lesson plans, notice what word would I be really embarrassed to say in front of students? Like, where is my discomfort? Where is it coming from? And there's just some reflection, personal reflection, and some practice that needs to happen to build that comfort. So that could be just like saying the word penis in the mirror 100 times, right? Until it doesn't feel so weird anymore. That could be like journaling on why this particular topic brings something personal up for you, right? There's so much in these topics that we have potentially trauma around or just discomfort around or never learned how to talk about. Would say if you can talk to other adults about it first, practice a lesson plan on them, that can always be helpful. And kind of relatedly, I think an underappreciated skill of teaching sex ed is just learning to control your facial expressions, because kids are going to say some wacky stuff and you're going to be able to be right there and you're going to be laughing in your head or screaming in your head, but out loud you're going to say, thank you so much for that question. That's a really good question. So I think our tone of voice and our facial muscles, that's just practice. And then we go and laugh about it with our colleagues or with our friends or whoever else, because it's very funny. It can be very funny. I would say relatedly to that, just ask for help, ask for support. People like us in this panel, like you can email me. You can email me at contact@yestoconsent.org and be like, I'm supposed to teach sex ed and I don't know how. And it's actually my job to support you because I want kids to get good sex ed. So turn to us, find the allies at your school. I think one thing that can be really scary about being asked to teach sex ed when that's not your job is not knowing what you could get in trouble for and what you're supposed to actually say or not say. So knowing sort of where your principal falls in this, how much they're going to stand behind you if there's parent pushback, who the veteran teachers are who believe in this and think it's important. I think just sort of mapping that out can be really helpful and minimize some of that fear and uncertainty of like, wait, they're telling me to talk about sex ed, but if I actually talk about sex ed, will it be okay? So I think, yeah, some of that relationship building can be really useful. I also find it really, really helpful and important to communicate with parents. I think that the number one fear from teachers and principals and school staff is, what will parents say? Will parents get angry? And the more that I've been able to include parents, the less that that's been the case. So having a parent meeting, saying, this is the curriculum, this is the plan, what questions do you have? What discomfort do you have? How can we talk about it together? Sometimes I send home lesson summaries for students to share with their parents, say, this is what we talked about today, especially for younger kids. These are follow-up discussion questions you can ask your kid if you want to continue the conversation. These are key terms we learned. So if a parent suddenly hears a kid say testicles who never said testicles before, they're not like, oh my God, where did you learn that? They know where they learned it, right? So yeah, I think building relationships and communication with parents is really helpful. And I guess finally, again, I could talk about this forever and ever, but I think one last thing I'll say that's, again, really simple and probably you already know, but do anonymous questions. So much less important. Like the lesson plans are important, but more important is what the kids are actually wondering about, asking each other about, and Googling, right? Like you have this opportunity to not just teach a curriculum that exists, but to actually be really responsive to student curiosity and needs. And so giving them the chance to ask those anonymous questions in a box or however you do it at the end of each class also gives you time to prepare answers for the next class instead of having to answer questions on the spot. So you're both getting their needs and their curiosity, and you're getting space and time to practice your answer. So I think that's one of the most important pieces of any good sex ed. curriculum because it's what the students really want to know, not just what we think they should want to know. So that's a short list of some things you could do. But I really think like turn to people who can support you. Don't do it by yourself. You don't have to do it by yourself.
Yeah, this was awesome advice. I love like the zoomed out to zoomed in because there are, free and available curriculums and things to build off of. But you're right that people are already so overworked, especially educators in this country. And there are so many smaller things that you can do in the day to day to contribute to showing up as a better sex educator if that's what you've been called upon to do, especially resonating with the piece about connecting with parents. I think for us, we definitely, I think initially went into providing youth programming, seeing parents as a potential barrier for students to access this information. And what we've learned is that through honesty and transparency, you're able to build those relationships, and that parents are, our biggest supporters and our superheroes, really. So that completely resonates as well. Yeah, so I am going to move along to Vanessa. And I was wondering if you could give us some insights on how schools and families can work together to provide better puberty and anatomy education for young folks, as well as how and where parents might be able to advocate for that education for the young people in their lives.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here in such awesome company with all these people doing incredible work. SEICUS is an unbelievable organization. And Alison, thank you for all you do to give us a national guideline. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do at Less Awkward. Our goal is to make all of this less awkward, to give kids information, um, educate their trusted adults, have people be in conversation with kids and with each other, so that, as Isy mentioned, this is not a taboo topic. These are things we can talk about because, as all of the research tells us, kids who receive comprehensive sex education are healthier and safer, full stop. So the question is, how do we get from here to there? How do we convince the folks who are uncomfortable with the words, who are uncomfortable with the subject matter? How do we convince them that all of the information and data we have, all the literature tells us it keeps all kids healthier and safer? So what we did at Less Awkward after touring with our book and our podcast is we had been to all these schools who were like, great, but how do we do it? So we built a curriculum that's currently live for 4th through 8th grade. We're launching high school in the fall and K through 3 in January. It's based on a 50-state spreadsheet that is informed by the good work of the folks at SEICUS, as well as the individual state standards of every single state. As Alison mentioned, some get better grades than others. And it is an effort to address what Isy mentioned, which is that there are folks teaching this content who are not trained, who are totally overwhelmed by it, who find it super intimidating and uncomfortable, but it's them or no one. On the other hand, there are people like the folks on this Zoom who are deeply experienced, incredibly passionate, have devoted their careers to teaching this, but they might be in communities that aren't super psyched about the work they're doing, or they're stretched so thin they don't have the bandwidth to create the decks, to source all of the videos and the content that they need to use to teach kids. So we created, it's called That Health Class with a little wink wink, and it's a health and sex ed curriculum that is like plug and play. So it's decks, and then there's really deep teacher notes with all the underlying data and research about why and when this content gets taught. We link out to the wonderful folks like amaze.org, who's a sister organization of advocates for youth, who created the awesome curriculum, 3Rs. We have folks working with us who've been trained in OWL, Our Whole Lives, another wonderful curriculum. So we are out there meeting with schools, talking to schools who want to do this work, who believe in doing this work and educating kids, but they are super overwhelmed by both the political situation and they are overwhelmed and stressed by parent pushback or what they perceive or anticipate parent pushback to be. So part of our job is to provide them all the underlying data and research that supports this work as just fundamentally important to the health and safety of kids. And then we help them with things like Isy mentioned a similar thing. We provide every single lesson in our curriculum has a parent communication email. It's a description of the lesson, why it's being taught at this age, and the learning objectives that are included in the lesson so that each week the teacher can send it, or ahead of at a parent ed night, they can pull together all of the lessons. That's super, super important. We also have a letter that explains why this is so important, why teaching this to kids is critical, and that goes out to all the families whose kids will be receiving it. On top of that, we created a companion to our curriculum. It's a hub for trusted adults, and it took our curriculum, the 42 lessons in our 4th through 8th grade, and flipped it into kind of parent-facing one-sheets. So there's transparency between the curriculum and what parents can see, because so often, if they just knew what was being taught, they would realize it's actually like not a big deal and great, and they want their kids to know it. But it's the opaqueness that parents feel that keeps them from engaging and sort of gives them a gut reaction. And I think, I can't remember, Izzy, maybe it was you mentioned, like people who didn't grow up with this stuff, they don't know what it is. It's like if someone said to me, go surfing, I'm like, I don't know how to surf. I don't have a surfboard. I can't stand up on it. I'm scared. I'm worried. So giving them transparency and information about what's in the content, why it's important, how they, as trusted adults, can have these conversations in their own homes. I want to just reiterate to everyone how critical it is for schools and parents and caregivers to be in partnership about this. Some parents, and we're seeing this in the legal landscape, are like, no, it's only up to me, and I judge what's appropriate. And other parents are like, oh, I just want the school to do it. I don't want to do it, like someone else do it. And the truth is, like, it's about the safety and well-being of our kids. It's everybody's job, like every trusted adult in a community, and all of our jobs. And so our goal is really to get folks in partnership with each other to sort of remove some of the obstacles, the informational barriers, the emotional barriers, and really help people feel like they're on the same side. One thing we're working on right now are actually kind of like book club guides, user guides to our parent course, so parents can get together and learn together. There's like a real loneliness about this material, not for us. We're all sitting here in community and we get to work with other folks, but teachers who teach this are often the only sex educator in their school building or the only health educator, and it's very lonely for them. And if something goes wrong, they feel like it's just like a lightning bolt to them. And then for parents, this is a very private time of life. Puberty and the adolescent years, we often stop sharing about our kids because it's physical changes, it's sexual exploration, it's substance exploration, and that feels like we can't share it. And that loneliness comes just at the time when we most need community. So as we think about, Tara, how parents can be advocates, how they can be involved, one thing is to do this in community. Yes, don't share your kids' personal stuff they don't want to share, but there's a million ways in which we can be in community with each other. So that's one thing. The other thing is, as Izzy mentioned, like find out what your kids are learning, because what you assume they're learning is like really different. Like a 3rd grade lesson may be about hygiene and sleep and pillars of health, and like yeah, maybe early puberty changes, but we're not talking in depth about all the different kinds that people choose to have sex. They may not be talking about porn. They may not be talking about topics that feel really big and overwhelming to us. They maybe just be talking about fundamental health, how we treat other people, consent and personal space, right? Like all the basics. So find out what your kid's school is teaching. I would approach it like, hey, I'm on your side. I really believe in this. How can we partner to make this happen, as opposed to a sort of contentious relationship? I think often in this space, depending on the community in which you live and the relationship you have with the school district, there are ways to get stuff done that allow you to be in partnership and get more done. Educate yourself, right? You can be concerned like, hey, I think this is important, but I don't even know what I'm asking for. So in order to advocate, we want to educate ourselves. All the folks on this Zoom have amazing Instagram accounts, have great websites. Again, I love amaze.org. It's an incredible organization. The work they do is fantastic. Better for younger kids. The videos are really, really good for younger kids. But part of our worry, our discomfort, our paralysis comes from not feeling knowledgeable enough in ourselves. And once we get over that hurdle, I think it's really, really awesome. And then we might hear what our kids are being taught in school, but it's really great to find out what the takeaway is when they come home. So what are they coming back with? What were some of the awesome, crazy, funny questions that got asked in their class? I mean, my kids, the best conversations I've had personally are what got asked. And when I work with kids, when I run puberty workshops, it just reinforces how brilliant and curious and excited and engaged kids can be. Like the world layers on this cynicism and indifference. And those of us who get to work with kids and teenagers know that beneath that veneer, if there even is a veneer, is incredible inquisitiveness and smarts. And I think if the world could see that, so it's our job to recognize it at home and then go out and advocate for this work out in the world. One other organization I want to shout out, Educate Us, Jacqueline Friedman's organization. I know they do work on the policy front. They're also doing great work about on the local level, organizing and lobbying for policies that support health and sex ed. So if you're looking to do something on the policy side, on the advocacy side, check out Educate Us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Incredible resources, and just incredible insights. Yeah, so we are going to hop over to our final pre-planned question before jumping into a Q&A. If you have questions that you want to submit to the Q&A feature is right there, and we can also open up the chat to those questions when we get to that bit. But finally, Mariah, if you are able to speak more on your work with youth and give us a peek into what young people are actually learning and are interested in that parents might not be aware of. And I think that's been a really good part of what kind of everyone has said, that a lot of these topics are intimidating because there's less transparency. And I think starting that conversation here would be awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a really great panel. I'm learning so much and hearing some really great resources. So I just want to say thank you for having me. I'll give you a little bit of context, so you know what capacity I work with youth. I do a couple things. My day job is a digital learning designer. I create curriculum, so I'm not working directly with youth in that capacity. But outside of my full-time job, I run a social media account, Sex Ed Files, and I contract with schools, so I work with youth directly there. And that's the way I got into this work is like direct service, working with youth directly. So yeah, that's my background. But what are youth learning? What do they want to know? I feel like I can just pull up my comment section and we can go through a list of things. But what I do want to say is that young people are curious, and I think that alone says a lot, because I feel like parents, other caring adults, they might feel intimidated or think that their young person isn't or doesn't want to know about these things. So I do want to say that they're open and willing to learn about sex, relationships, identity, all of it. They don't strike me as a generation that's grossed out by the conversation, whereas when I was like in high school, no one wanted to talk about this stuff because of the taboo nature of it, which it still is. But I would say there's a general openness about it. And social media, I think, has a lot to do with that. And I think they're eager to learn about something that they don't get to learn about elsewhere. And I'm not, again, not sure parents realize how ready their kids are or teens are, whoever, for honest and nuanced conversations about this stuff. And that goes for my comment sections, but also in school presentations. A lot of young people will make it a point to thank me or for simply creating a safe space where their questions and curiosity are welcome. And so that, that feedback, I'm like, okay, this is really relevant and needed. And to continue, I think young people, they already know what sex is, often more than we think. And at the same time, that doesn't mean they have accurate information, and that doesn't mean their caring adults or parents are giving them the space to talk about it in ways that feel healthy or supportive. Because I'm a firm believer that sex ed is a lifelong journey, and parents play a huge role in that journey. So if they are lucky enough to have a quality-ish sex ed class for a week or a day or however long it is, depending on where you are, parents can really fill in those gaps and continue to create safe and supportive spaces to talk about this stuff or even reflect on some of the things they learned. But if they don't have those opportunities, where are they going? TikTok, Reddit, Instagram, YouTube, Pornhub. Literally, it's a mixed bag. And some of it, porn is a separate conversation, but social media, I would say, some of it is great information, but a lot of it, I think, skips the nuance and context or care that they really need, especially on like an individual or personal level. Um, And yeah, I think as a educator who's worked in the classroom a lot, I feel like you can't, and also someone who does social media sex ed, you can't fully replicate the discussion and reflection piece that real learning and growing requires. You can't replicate that on social media or online. So that's where I think parents, caring adults, that's where they can plug in. And that's just simply actively participating in conversations. And even if your child doesn't want you to, I think knowing that they can talk about it, that's powerful in and of itself. So I think anytime parents are like, what do I do? How do I talk about it? I think the willingness alone goes a long way. Yeah, I really do. Because kids aren't going to stop being curious, and they're going to turn elsewhere if there's not that space. One of the questions is like what topics, like what are they actually interested in right now? And that I'm seeing a lot of pleasure. They want to know about pleasure. They want to talk about it. They want to talk about porn. They want to talk about how to navigate consent without it feeling awkward or like a script. They want to know these very important life skills that go beyond basic anatomy and how to use a condom, which is why I love the Youth Sexpert program, because their curriculum touches on these things that aren't in traditional sex ed curricula. That's what they're asking about, from my perspective. They're also asking about power dynamics in relationships. And of course, a lot of their questions reflect what's trending online. I'm sure y'all see this all the time. You can see what's trending right now. I would say it's gooning, which is an internet term. I think That's where it stemmed from. It refers to entering like a trance-like state from prolonged edging, delaying orgasm to enhance masturbation. And they're talking about it all over. TikTok specifically is where I'm seeing it. And also on my question cards, they love to talk about gooning, whether or not they know what it means. But that's popular. Honey packs, very popular. That was trending maybe a couple months ago. Still is, still getting questions about it. But at the end of the day, they're not just trends. They reflect real curiosity about pleasure, performance, arousal, what is considered normal. And I think if parents want to be there for these conversations, yeah, it might require doing a little bit of research on your own time, but that I feel like that doesn't take too much effort. Yeah, I don't know. The thing is, I'm also not a parent, so I totally understand if this advice isn't useful. But what I will say is that that willingness, that is so, so helpful for a teen, a child to know I can go to this caring adult because they they want to support me. They are a safe space. They may not know what is up, but if I need them, I can go to them. Um, so I think it's all in how you approach questions, you approach the conversation with openness instead of shame. And I think all of us here do a really good job of that, especially if you're in this profession. Um, yeah, I think that answers most of it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And so much of what you said reflects so much of my experience also working with youth directly. Again, if people are jumping off before the Q&A, I just wanted to mention that our program, the Youth Sexpert program, we offer a semester's worth of comprehensive sex ed for youth, and we work with them directly digitally. And so I have a lot of similar experiences that touch on what Mariah was saying. Our applications for this fall open at the beginning of July, so it's coming up. Um, and then also being on the internet and seeing internet trends come up in spaces with young people is always so funny. I got a lot of questions about edging, probably more questions about edging this past year than in previous years, but yeah, it's definitely something I've noticed as well. And I also resonate with not being a parent, but also recognizing the importance of conversations between educators and parents in creating environments where youth are able to ask questions both in the classroom and in their homes. Yeah, so thank you all again so much for these answers. I believe that we have, I think, one question that I'm seeing so far that I think could be open for everybody. Before I hop into that question, somebody had a specific question for Alison about whether or not there are downloadable data sets for the SEICUS state profiles. So I'm not sure if you'd want to share verbally or via the chat.
Yeah, so we do state profiles are downloadable. So you should be able to download that. If it's not, let me know because that means we just didn't click the right button on the website on the back end. But yes, they should all be downloadable.
Awesome. And then the question that I think could work to sort of open up to everyone and maybe close out if there aren't other questions, is how can sex educators stay up to date on recent studies about contemporary topics? For example, the effects of social media on adolescent sexual attitudes and behaviors. So I think that should display, yeah. Cool. So keeping up to date on, recent trends and things like that. Yeah, Mariah.
I think conferences, and I know some of them are very expensive. I can't even afford some of them, like literally. But there are some really great online workshops, things that are offered at an affordable rate or free. When I was just getting into this work, I would attend every free SEICUS workshop every free Amaze Con. They have like an Amaze conference that's free. And I feel like because so many experts attend these and are also providing the information, you just learn so much about what's happening right now. So that is my suggestion. I've learned so much from that. And of course, following different experts and people working in the space on social media. I've also learned so much there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think, a lot of these organizations have newsletters that go out monthly that they provide kind of that overall scope. I know we have a monthly newsletter that goes out. The Healthy Teen Network does, Advocates for Youth. So if you sign up for one of those listservs or all of them, then you will definitely be in the know as things come out. But I would just also add to that is that I think, the with how fast technology is changing, I think that sex educators are in a new era when we look at AI and we're looking at how, you know, more and more restrictions are coming into schools and things like that. So I think that it's a great question because we are at this very precarious time where information and factual and research-based scientific information is being suppressed. And so I think, overall beyond sex education, that those are things that we need to fight for. Thinking of there's a youth risk behavior survey that goes out every 2 years that used to collect information on sexuality. A number of those questions have been called back recently and will not be implemented any longer, so that data is not going to be collected. So I think it's also really important to recognize, and at this point in time, that maybe we'll need to look outside of the United States for the most cutting edge information.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Allison. I mean, the pausing or just elimination of these studies is frankly devastating to those of us who do this work. Our book, we relied heavily on the research out of the CDC and the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. There are nonprofits like Common Sense Media I would point to for that specific question. They're doing a lot of work around tracking the impact of tech, social media, porn on teens' behaviors, attitudes, and mental health. Um, I mean, like simply, I have a bunch of Google alerts set up, so I get to see what's coming out and what news there is from all different perspectives, which is sometimes important to see how stuff is being communicated, laws, changes. Less awkward, we put out a newsletter. We once a month, our newsletter is about news affecting tweens, teens, health and sex ed, all of that, because it's a lot of work to collate all this data, read through all the articles. And so, I think other organizations do that. Somebody put in a task force coming up about internet crimes against children. I think, to Allison's point, there's an incredible amount of fear, frankly, around the misinformation and the impact of misinformation on young people, on all of us. And I think having communities of people with whom you can talk about this stuff. I know that there's just wonderful small conferences around the country that maybe don't have a national profile, but have virtual programming or just local health educators, which are super useful. But I think the biggest fear is stuff that's actually been removed and we no longer have access to. It's not just like what's coming out, but also like what's no longer available. Interestingly, the folks from the SCIM actually backed up all the studies that had been removed specifically around reproductive health. So they have a site. So assuming that research and data that you had accessed previously is still the same research and data that you're accessing today, it's important to be skeptical and aware of how that literature may have changed in the last year. Oh, sorry, skip the SCIM. I'll put it in the
I'll just add one thing more. I really agree with everything that's been said. Conferences were also really huge for me. The National Sex Ed Conference just announced their February dates in Baltimore. But something else that we've been doing in Philly that's been really instrumental and kind of life-changing is just having regular sex ed meetups. So there's a few different ones that are happening in Philly. There's sort of a sexuality professionals meetup that's more social, that's sex educators and therapists and all other sexuality professionals just to build network and community. And then there's another one that's specifically for sex educators that has a Skillshare component. And we do announcements, what's been challenging in our work lately, what are our asks, what are our offers. So just really supporting each other. Those are all free. So I think like building, whether it's online and it's national or international, or whether it's really local, building a strong community of sexuality educators. Because I think a lot of sexuality educators are like the one person who does that at their job. And like we're not all lucky enough to work at sex ed orgs where we have a big community of sex ed people. So a lot of people feel really isolated and don't know what other people are doing and are writing their own lessons and solving their own problems when we're all sort of dealing with the same things. So yeah, I just think that is a really valuable resource.
Yeah, I love all these answers. And I think my thoughts to sort of close out this question, I feel like a lot of new and emerging conversations about sex are inspired by larger pop culture. And I think a lot of digital sex educators do a really awesome job of creating content about it. Love Island, I know, is starting a lot of conversations about healthy relationships and STIs. And I remember adolescence was a really big conversation, I think, for parents and educators alike. I'm always super interested in sort of keeping tabs on how the manosphere and like online sort of indoctrination is taking different forms constantly. And so, yeah, I think that there are films, TV shows, books that are inspiring all of us to think more about sex and sexuality. I did have one more question that I would open to the group, and then I had another question that came in that was for Vanessa specifically. I think I'll just send to the chat if that's okay. For the group, the final question I think we'll answer today is how does the rising age of sexual behavior impact when and how to sequence sex ed? And absolutely not everybody has to answer, but if you have thoughts.
Well, I mean, sex education is a prevention method. So we don't teach people to drive once they turn 16. We teach people to drive before, and it's a multi-year process and there's multiple steps. And so I think the same goes for sex education is that there are parts of our sexuality that are evolving from the moment we're born. And so it's important to address those as it's happening, but then also to recognize that, a lot of times the only system that we have for young people really in this country is our public education system. And obviously not everybody participates in that, but that is the biggest system with which we have people. And so recognizing that in America, we're trying to like pack in all this information so that when you graduate high school, you're like this fully functioning adult, right? That's the goal anyway, according to the Department of Education, or it was a couple months ago. So I would say that regardless of where somebody is in their activity, the information is always going to be relevant. I think a really great example of this is this menstrual education, because menstrual education is not just talking about menstruation, but it's also going into, talking about the lack of menstruation and going into perimenopause and what is menopause about, which is something as a country. And I know when I came into it, wasn't ready for it because nobody ever talked about it, right? So it's like, so even if it's just something that's triggering like that, oh, I remember there's this website I could go to that I learned about in high school, and I can, be a more critical consumer of what I'm looking for online as I'm looking for answers, then I think that we are doing the work correctly.
Yeah, I would love to add to that. I appreciate everything you said. And, you know, people choosing to have sex later doesn't mean they don't need the information or they need it later. It means that they have, hopefully, all the information they needed to make the choice they wanted, right? Like someone could never have sex and they need sex ed to know that that's okay and that they are allowed to decide that and they're allowed to say no, right? So sex ed isn't preparing someone for sex so much as it's giving them the information, skills, and attitudes that they need to meet their own goals. And I'm just thinking a lot about, you use this driving metaphor, right? We teach kids to drive before they're 16, but I'm thinking as my early childhood self, but at age 3 and age 4, we're teaching them to read stoplights, right? We're teaching them what green and red mean because that's a safety thing already, long before they need to use it to drive. And the same thing with period products and menstruation. And with my youngest kids, sometimes with young elementary schoolers, we just make period product art. We turn tampons into sea creatures and use googly eyes and pipe cleaner legs, and then we put them in water and watch them puff up. And we talk a little bit about how they're used for periods, right? But the idea is, and people of all genders are doing this. The kids are too young even for the boys to be like, why do I have to learn this? Which they start doing by like 4th or 5th grade. So it's just now everyone has touched a tampon, everyone has touched a pad. When these things come back, they won't be new. When all this other stuff is scary and new. So I'm a big fan of it's never too early. There's always a way to do it age appropriately. It builds comfort, it builds safety. So.
And I would just jump on the data we have about people having sex later. I mean, it sort of depends how you define sex. Like there may be less penile vaginal intercourse, but it's not clear that there's not other kinds of sex that's happening early or more frequently, rates of anal sex, rates of oral sex, and then to the big question of how porn is impacting young people's sexual behaviors. And is that the reason why they're delaying or forgoing sex altogether, and how that impacts their understanding of intimate relationships and sexuality? So, sadly, without the YRBS surveys, we may not have that data, but anecdotally, and the work that Tara and Mariah are doing, we're hearing from kids and young people what's coming back. How this stuff is impacting them. I would point people to the amazing work of Debbie Herbenek out of Indiana University around rough sex and the sexual behaviors of young people and how porn is impacting those choices. So again, we have to be super critical consumers about some of the clickbait headlines and trends about people's sexual behavior.
Awesome. Well, we are at 5:01, and I do want to just thank all of the panelists again for the incredible information that you've provided us. I learned so much, and I do this every day. I talk about sex every day. So that's really a testament to just how much wealth you've provided us in just an hour. This has been awesome. To all of the attendees, we will be sending you a recording. And that recording will eventually be available on our website and our YouTube. But yeah, thank you for coming through. Please feel free to email us. Our email is on our website with any questions or concerns. And thank you all again.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everyone,
Thank you.
Thank you.